If the world had already decided what you are, a disappointment, a headline, a last name, how many seconds of truth would it take to rewrite the script? 10? 30? The length of a locked door breath? The probation letter crinkled like a cheap secret in Lila Harrington's fist as she stepped out of Dean Park's office and into the cathedral-quiet corridor of Harrington Hall, the building her family paid for, the building whose bronze plaque repeated her surname like a chorus. Harrington, the word used to feel like a ladder. Tonight, it felt like a mirror tilted the wrong way. Your current academic standing is concerning, the dean had said in a tone so gentle it made the words heavier. Third consecutive semester below threshold. The letter finished the sentence Dean Park didn't. And your last name won't save you forever. Outside, rain stitched the quad with silver thread. Lila texted her driver to go home without her. She didn't want tinted windows or softly menacing leather. She wanted the kind of walk that scrubs shame off the skin. The campus at midnight held its breath. Street lamps pooled their light in perfect circles, like stages waiting for actors brave enough to say the first line. She drifted toward the library because that's where people go when the math of their life stops adding up. One window glowed on the third floor. Through the glass, she saw him, a young black man in a navy custodial jacket, shoulders squared from work no one applauds. He pushed a cleaning cart between rows of books as if steering a small ship through a paper ocean. Then he did something that made the air inside Lila's lungs change temperature. He stopped, slid a book from the shelf, and started reading. Really reading, like a man who had bargained with the night for a few minutes of joy. Lila put her palm to the door. Locked. Of course, except the East emergency exit had a temper she'd learned freshman year. If you pressed and lifted, the bolt sulked and let you pass. She pressed. It yielded with a tiny, traitorous sigh. Sorry, library's closed, he said as soon as she stepped into the hush. No suspicion, no fear, just a boundary, kindly drawn. What book? Lila asked and heard how hungry she sounded. He turned the cover toward her. Quantum Physics, a gentle introduction. He smiled at his own joke. The gentle part lies. You read Quantum Physics between floors? She said, surprised into honesty. I read a lot between floors, he said, sliding the book back the way you set down a sleeping child. Keeps my head from rusting. The letter burned in her fist again. She opened her hand, looked at the black stamp of failure, and said what she'd practiced not saying. I got put on probation. He nodded. No performance, no pity. That costs. Everyone says I'm sorry like it's punctuation, she murmured, but they don't pay the tax. I'm Elias, he said, as if offering his name were the fairest way to meet her pain. Elias Monroe. Lila. She gestured toward the plaque outside. The family. The tower of expectation with her initials carved on every rung. As advertised. His gaze took her in without bowing to the advertisement. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the book, assessing its weight, its truth, its use. Then, what do you love that no one can grade? No tutor had ever begun there. They started with syllabi like battle plans, equations like fences. The question scratched something soft and long-starved. Art, she said, before the reflex to perform could edit it away. Paintings, the kinds that feel like a secret between the colors. That tracks, he set his mop against a table, as if choosing to be a person before he was an employee. Here's a worse secret than probation. Most people try to learn by starting at the wrong end of the book. The end with the answers, she asked. The end with the labels, he said. They memorize the map before they've seen the landscape. He pulled a receipt from his pocket and sketched 2 lines crossing. Supply, demand. The graph that had humiliated her all semester. Everybody tells you this is math, he said. It is. But first it's a story about pressure. He tapped the downward slope. Want. The upward slope. Limits. He tapped the crossing. A truce. She leaned closer despite herself. A truce between the crowd who say, I want lemons, but not at $5, and the grocer counting rot in the back room. He drew a cartoon lemon so jaunty it made her laugh. If this were a painting, what would the title be? She surprised herself again. August, 3 left on the shelf. Great title, he said, genuinely delighted. Now the math won't feel like a foreign language. It'll feel like captions under a photograph you already understand. In 8 minutes of lemon metaphors, something in Lila's brain turned its face toward the sun. She didn't feel smart yet. She felt reachable. "Where did you learn to explain things like this?" she asked. He glanced around the stacks that had taught them both different kinds of hunger. "Here," he said softly, "on a scholarship. I was a first-gen kid with a map and no compass. Then my mom got sick, and the scholarship clock didn't care what language grief speaks. There are sentences that end a conversation and sentences that open one." He had traded her honesty for his. Lila put the letter down on the table between them, like an artifact they could examine together instead of a weapon aimed at her alone. "Do you want help?" he asked, not as a salesman, but as a neighbor at a broken fence. "I've had help," she said, "the kind with hourly rates and espresso machines." "Tutors sell answers," Elias said. "I can only offer questions. Better ones. Nara, what would they cost me?" "Pride," he said, "and a notebook you're not afraid to mess up." She smiled without meaning to. "My father says results are the language of the world. Curiosity is the accent that makes you sound like you belong there," Elias said. "Dean Park isn't wrong about your standing. But the part no one tells you? Standing changes when you start walking differently." The clock over the circulation desk rolled past midnight. Rain needled the window, softer now. On Lila's silent phone, her father's name glowed. "Call me tonight." "I will," she typed, then didn't hit send. "Okay," she said, and heard the steadiness in her own voice. "Show me how to walk differently." "We start with a rule," Elias said. "No pretending to understand. If a word feels like fog, say fog. I'm not here to be impressed. I'm here to make the fog burn off." "Deal," she said, and put out her hand like a kid who just decided to be unafraid. His palm was calloused. The handshake was gentle. Both felt like truth. He turned the receipt over and drew a rectangle. "This is not a classroom," he said, labeling it. "This is a studio. Studios forgive sketches." They filled the rectangle with lemons and housing markets and cafeteria pizza and bus schedules and three kinds of patience. He translated every cold term into a human decision. Elasticity became how quickly a crowd changes its mind. Externality became the bill you send to people who didn't order the mess. Marginal cost became the extra bruise the next lemon will give you. She translated back into math without the old panic clawing her chest. They built a bridge plank by plank, story to symbol, symbol to story. At some point, he asked the question that had ached under all the others. "What are you most afraid of?" "That I'm not intelligent," she said, and waited for the wince, the lecture, the pity. "Then we'll build intelligence," he said, like a carpenter picking up a hammer. "Not the score kind, the sturdy kind, the kind that holds when the room gets loud." A giggle bubbled up, half relief, half disbelief. "Can you do that?" "You can," he said. "I can hold the flashlight." The letter on the table felt less like a sentence and more like a snapshot of a moment that would not last. Outside, in the world of headlines and fundraisers, and men who thought in quarters and empires, being a Harrington meant performance. In here, being Lila meant permission. He capped his pen, picked up the mop. Duty tugged at him. So did the book. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded. "I'll bring a cheap notebook, and the questions I'm embarrassed to ask." "Bring your favorite painting too," he said over his shoulder. "We'll hang economics next to it and see which one teaches the other more." Ekram. She took the bad exit, press, lift, release, and stepped into rain that now felt like applause against the sidewalk. Her fingers typed before fear could edit. "Dad, I'll call in the morning. I have a plan." She hit send. Halfway down the steps, she turned back. Through tall glass, she watched Elias prop the book open beside the mop, like two kinds of work that deserve each other. He read the night forward as if time were clay. "Stop racism, family," Lila whispered to the empty quad, thinking of the viewers who'd taught her to listen more bravely than her world required. "Where are you watching from?" She could picture the replies stacking like lights in an apartment tower. "Type 1 if you believe a mind can change with the right teacher. Type 0 if you need proof." She smiled. "I guess we're about to gather evidence." Back in her room, she spread a handful of receipt paper sketches across her desk until they looked like constellations. At the top of a new page, she wrote, Different beats harder, then under it, smaller. No pretending. By dawn, she hadn't slept. She didn't feel doomed. She felt drafted into her own rescue. When Victor Harrington asked for results at breakfast, Lila didn't bring him the letter like a confession. She brought him the plan like a contract. 30 days, no tutors, no performative studying, one brutal metric, understanding measured in her own words. He searched her face for bluffs and found only rain-washed resolve. "This is going to be expensive," he said out of habit. "For once," Lila replied, surprising them both, "it might be the cheapest thing I ever do." That night, she arrived at the library 5 minutes early with a $5 spiral from the campus store and a list titled, "Questions I Don't Say Out Loud." Elias arrived with a thermos and 2 pencils. No ceremony, no speeches. Just a studio with forgiving paper and a rule against pretending. The lemon waited on the receipt like a bright, ordinary miracle. They began. The studio, formerly known as a library table, opened every midnight like a stage that trusted its actors. On the first page of Lila's spiral, under no pretending, Elias wrote a second line. "Translate until it breathes." Then he slid the notebook back and nodded at her list. "Questions I don't say out loud." She read the first one without apology. "Why do curves bend?" "Because people do," he said. "We don't want the same amount at every price, and producers don't make the same amount at every cost. Bends are how paper admits humans exist." He drew a bus route on the margin. "At 7 a.m., this line is full because time is expensive. At noon, it's empty because time is cheap. Same bus, different pressure. Economics is choreography. Watch the crowd." They started to watch everything. In the cafeteria, elasticity tasted like pizza after midnight. Demand there was so inelastic, even bad slices disappeared. In the art building, marginal utility was 5 minutes with the best studio light. The first minute felt like revelation, the fifth like a miracle's echo. In the residence hall, externalities smelled like burned popcorn drifting under doors. Someone's tiny choice became everyone's tiny annoyance. "Write it," Elias would say, pointing at her spiral. "If you can't write it, you can't hold it. If you can't hold it, the exam will drop it for you." They kept the math close but shy for the first week, like a skittish animal you coax with steady hands in a quiet room. Where other tutors had flung formulas like life preservers toward a drowning student, Elias made the pool shallow, then taught Lila how to breathe. By day 4, she could sketch shifts without panicking. By day 6, she could narrate a price ceiling's unintended consequences without sounding like she was parroting the book. By day 9, she startled herself by running out of questions before the hour ended. That night, her phone throbbed with a text from her friend circle. People with last names that could buy a plaza and the ability to pronounce quinoa correctly since childhood. Margot, rooftop at Arden's, 10 p.m. Come or we send a search party. Hunter, bring your new study vibe. We'll put it on ice. Lila stared at the screen. There was a time when she would have dragged her shame up there like glitter and laughed it away. Instead, she typed, "Rain check, studio time." Then she slid the phone face down and looked up at Elias. "Studio time?" he teased, hiding a smile. "It's catching," she said. "Sorry, my friends think effort is a personality flaw." "Effort is a luxury too sometimes," he said gently. "If your life gets easier when you try, you're privileged. Some of us try and the floor just moves." She felt the sentence land in a place no textbook could reach. "I want to remember that, not as guilt, as calibration." They calibrated everything. On the second week, he asked for her favorite painting. She brought a postcard print of Kehinde Wiley's portrait of a young gentleman. The man's gaze met the viewer's with unnegotiated dignity. The background was lush with pattern, unapologetically ornate. "Why this?" Elias asked. "Because it refuses smallness," she said. "Because the subject owns the frame." "Then let's do that," he said. "Own the frame." He drew a rectangle and labeled its axes with words she had always feared. Output, price. "This is just a frame. Who owns it depends on who's telling the story. Don't let the textbook be the only narrator." She narrated supply shocks like weather. She narrated recessions like collective grief. She narrated opportunity costs like a love story between two possible lives. When the calculus arrived, derivatives peeking around corners like shy ghosts, Elias didn't flinch. He translated, slope is just how quickly a feeling changes. The feeling of cost, the feeling of benefit. He gave her permission to speak numbers in human. On day 12, a teaching assistant named Tom, last name omitted to avoid ruining the vibe, and also because he wore his own like a badge, stopped by their table. He took in the mop, the thermos, the cheap spiral, and smiled with the particular width the privileged reserve for people they think are trespassing. "Studying late?" Tom asked Lila, eyes flicking over the probation letter still tucked in her notebook pocket like a bruise. "Writing," she said. "Office hours are posted," he reminded her, already writing her off. "We cover this in section." "We cover labels in section," Lila replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "We're learning the landscape." Tom's smile thinned. "Make sure your landscape knows calculus." "Make sure your calculus knows people," Elias said nearly under his breath. Soft, but not soft enough. Tom bristled, then left. Lila exhaled. "Was that stupid?" "It was honest," Elias said. "And you didn't apologize for learning out loud. That's new." That same night, her father's assistant emailed a pared-down ultimatum. Victor requests an update. Show progress or accept deferred enrollment and a gap year plan. Lila closed the laptop and held the panic like a fragile thing. "I have 15 days, she whispered, "to turn a ship that's been sailing wrong for 4 years. "Then we don't turn the ship," Elias said. "We turn the rudder. Small angle. Long ocean." He gave her a ritual for when panic came. A 4-count breath, a sentence to anchor the mind, and a question to chase. The sentence, different beats harder, lived at the top of every page. The question changed nightly. Where is the human in this model? What is the pressure? Who pays the bill? What shifts first? On day 15, they took the studio on the road to the cheapest diner within walking distance of the library. Their booth smelled like coffee and old debates. A chalkboard advertised an omelet special that had never been special. Lila watched the night crowd, nurses in scrubs, 2 line cooks, a student asleep on a textbook, a grandmother holding court over pancakes at midnight, and narrated to Elias in whispers. "Her shift ends at 2, she murmured, nodding at a nurse laughing with a bus driver. "Her time budget is tighter than any budget line I've seen on paper. The marginal utility of that laugh is enormous." Elias grinned. "Keep going." "The student's asleep because the price of failure will crush tomorrow, but the price of rest will crush tonight. He's solving an impossible equation with a blanket. Keep going." "The grandmother is teaching a seminar on incentives with a side of syrup." "Congratulations," Elias said. "You're dangerous now." "Because I can pass the test?" "Because you can see," he said. "Tests are short. Seeing is forever." Back on campus, the midterm took place in a lecture hall designed to make students feel small and concepts feel tall. Lila walked in with her cheap spiral and a pencil she'd tested on a lemon doodle for luck. Tom, the TA, gave the instructions like a man narrating a ritual while thinking about pizza. The clock on the wall became a tyrant, then a metronome, then a friend. The first problem was a shock, not a memorized shape, but a story disguised as numbers. 2 cities faced a housing squeeze. One imposed rent control, the other used targeted vouchers. Discuss the short and long-term consequences with reference to efficiency and equity. Lila colored the page with sentences that tasted like studio nights. Pressure, truce, people. She didn't sermonize, she translated. She drew one small, careful graph and told it a story it had never had in her head before. When the proctor called time, she felt like she had left part of her voice in the blue book, and that felt right. Grades posted a week later at 6 p.m. She didn't look at the portal right away, not because she feared a C, but because she wanted to remember the moment before the result tried to narrate the work. Then she opened it. Econ 101 midterm, 92 AI. The number didn't dance. It just sat there, factual as a doorframe, and let her walk through. She ran, not elegantly, across campus to the science building, where Elias was cleaning the 3rd-floor windows. He saw her face and knew the way a teacher knows when silence has turned to speech in a student's mouth. "You passed," he said, not a question. "I spoke," she replied, breathless, and the page listened. He laughed, a sound that made the sterile hallway feel like a backyard. She told him about the housing problem and the rent ceiling that looked merciful in the short run and brutal in the long, about the vouchers that looked messy but bent incentives better, about how she used the word truce and how it fit. He handed her the squeegee like a scepter. Sir Isaac Newton trembles in his grave, he said solemnly. We are founding the School of Lemon Economics. For a while they stood in a corridor that smelled faintly of ammonia and victory. Then he grew serious in that careful way he had when he was about to put a guardrail on a cliff you couldn't see yet. Lila, he said, voice low, this is the part where some people stop. They hit, I can do this, and they coast. Don't coast. Practice is a kindness future. You will wish present you had not refused. Then let's be kind, she said. They doubled down. Not on hours, on intention. Lila began indexing her spiral like a librarian of her own brain, tabbed sections for stories, translations, math, and mistakes worth keeping. She rewrote problems in her own words until they sounded like conversations she might overhear on a bus. She started asking professors questions that came from curiosity instead of panic. Some professors welcomed her like a prodigal thinker. Some blinked like deer in the trajectory of a new idea. She learned to accept both without letting either define her. At home, her father watched like an investor who had wagered reputation instead of cash. Victor did not coo, he audited. When he finally read the midterm feedback, remarkable synthesis, original framing, strong command of trade-offs, he set the paper down and looked at his daughter as if he were meeting her at a new altitude. Show me again how the truce works, he said, testing her, or maybe testing the idea of her. She drew him a lemon and a skyline. He stared at the doodle and laughed, surprised. Lemons and housing policy. If a board meeting ever gets dull, I'm hiring you to diagram the agenda like that. Careful, she said. I charge in omelets. What changed? He asked finally, still squinting at her, as if the light around her had turned. I stopped renting answers, she said, and started buying questions. The friends who had invited her to rooftops noticed too. Margot whispered at brunch, You're different. In a good way, but also in a way that scares the boys. Hunter lifted his mimosa like a sword. To reinvented Lila, may she save us from microeconomics and dating apps. I can only help with one of those, Lila said, and the table laughed because they thought she meant microeconomics. Her favorite change was quieter. She began to like her own thoughts, not because they were always right, but because they were becoming earned. One night near the end of the month, rain returned, softer this time, like memory. They arrived to find the library dotted with other midnight scholars, students rehearsing presentations aloud, a violin case yawning open, two roommates arguing about sunk costs while very obviously talking about a relationship. The studio table felt claimed. It felt like a home you build by showing up. Open your spiral, Elias said. Pick any concept, teach it back to me with no graphs until I ask. She chose comparative advantage and told it like a travel story. Two chefs in one kitchen, one brilliant at pastry, decent at pasta, the other steady at pasta, miserable at sugar. They both got fed quickest when the brilliant one baked and the steady one sauced. Trade as kindness to time. Productivity as a humane allocation of gifts. She slid in the math only when the narrative begged for it. Where did you learn to do that? He asked when she finished. In a studio, she said, and they both smiled. They packed it too. He reached for the spiral to return it. Their fingers brushed and the air in the room changed key. The sentence that rose in her throat frightened her with its clarity, so she swallowed it and looked at the lemon on the receipt instead. Same time tomorrow? Elias asked, back to gentle boundaries. Same time, she said, because some truths earn their moment and some earn their patience. At the door, she paused. You were right about pretending. It's heavier than honesty. Honesty's lighter, he said. It just costs more up front. She stepped into the drizzle with her cheap notebook zipped inside her jacket like contraband and thought of all the tests she'd failed by trying to sound fluent in a language she wasn't allowed to speak. She wasn't fluent yet, but she had found her accent. On the quad, a flyer flapped on a bulletin board, too wet to read. She peeled it free and laughed. Econ 101. Supplemental instruction with Tom G. She thought of Tom's smile and his warning and wished him well. She didn't need his section anymore. She had a studio and a rule and a way to turn fog into air. Back in her room, she recorded a short message for the people who had become a chorus on the other side of the screen. Her Stop Racism family, the ones who would ask where she was watching from and answer with cities that made her feel less alone. Type lemon if you've ever needed a new way to see the old lines, she said, grinning. And truce if you've ever watched two kinds of worry agree to stop fighting. Then she wrote on a new page, practice is a kindness. Under it, keep showing up. Under that, own the frame. The month ended not with fireworks, but with a click, the sound of a mind learning how to move under its own power. In the quiet that followed, Lila understood the most dangerous part of success wasn't failure's absence. It was complacency's swagger. She closed the spiral and promised the studio an answer it deserved. I'll be back tomorrow. Because she knew, tests are short, seeing is forever, and forever had just begun. The month of small angles and long oceans ended with an invitation that felt like a verdict. At 4:07 p.m., Lila's phone lit up with a calendar hold from her father's assistant. Heritage Club. Private dinner attendees. Victor Harrington. +6 associates. Dress formal note. Celebrate Lila's academic progress. Celebrate. The word wore a tuxedo and a warning. Lila stared at it the way you stare at a glass staircase. Pretty, slippery, and high enough to break you. In the studio that night, she put the invite down between the lemon sketches and the new page labeled, Practice is a Kindness. The Heritage Club? Elias asked. He didn't bother to hide the history the name carried. Apparently my progress requires caviar, she said, trying for lightness and landing somewhere nearer to dread. He wants his colleagues to see it, not just read numbers on a portal. Elias wiped a circle of table clean that didn't need wiping. Then they'll see it. And they'll see you, she said before she could stop herself. Will they? He kept his eyes on the table. I don't get many invitations to your father's world. Neither do I, she said, and it was truer than she meant it to be. The parts of that world she was welcome in required a mask that pinched. He tapped the invitation lightly. What do you want me to do? I don't want you to do anything, she said. I want to know whether you'll be anywhere near that block tomorrow night. He looked up. His gaze had the steadiness of a carpenter measuring twice before cutting. Mia's scholarship dinner, he said. Her school booked the Heritage for their little ceremony. They've got a side banquet room. I promised to bring the dress she forgot at home. Lila winced. So, we'll be within 100 feet of each other, separated by carpets. By carpets and rules, he said gently. They left it there because the studio was a place for questions you could write down. Tomorrow's questions were the kind that didn't fit on paper. The Heritage Club rose from the corner of Lake and Wabash like a cathedral married a bank. Marble that pretended not to be lonely. Brass that remembered every glove that polished it. A doorman like an oil painting. At the revolving door, the world separated. Members to the right, staff to the left. Lila had never liked that little fork in the path. Now it itched under her skin. Victor Harrington wore navy that made other suits feel casual. Lila wore a silver dress that looked like she had survived a meteor shower and decided to be generous about it. The room they entered was all chandeliers and history, men who'd shaken hands with other men until deals turned into skylines. Gentlemen, Victor said with a warmth he mostly reserved for winning, you've read the numbers. Tonight you'll meet the person behind them. He made the introductions. Robert Yates, a man who collected airports like keychains. Cecilia Park, rival VC, famous for soft-voiced no's that made founders thank her. Two hedge fund people whose names slid off memory. Tom from the econ section, improbably, summoned as an intern to someone's someone. Lila did the small talk. It felt like translating a language she spoke because it paid rent in rooms like this. How did you turn it around? Yates asked with the tone of a man asking how you tamed a tiger for a party trick. I stopped renting answers, Lila said, stealing her own line because it fit. Started buying questions. Cecilia's eyes sharpened. Who taught you to say that? A studio, Lila said, and watched curiosity war with condescension. Appetizers arrived in neat rows that looked like data visualizations. Conversations braided around quarterly numbers, midterm elections, Supply chain confusion? Lila held her own, not the way her father did by dominating space, but by refusing smallness. She said trade-offs without apologizing for complexity. She said equity and efficiency like two hands on the same wheel. She forgot to be ornamental. Then the door near the service corridor clicked open and a small commotion rippled the perimeter like a dropped fork. A security guard's voice crisp as a starch. Staff entrance is on the west side. Leela didn't mean to look. She did. Of course she did. And there he was, Elias in his navy jacket, holding a garment bag like it contained someone's future. He wasn't resisting. He was explaining. The guard wasn't listening. The manager hovered, polite like ice. It was a choreography Lila had never learned, because life had choreographed other people to learn it for her. "Excuse me," she said, already moving. Victor's hand closed gently around her wrist. He didn't squeeze. He anchored. "Lila." "I'll be right back," she said, and pride-free with a smile that said, "Trust me," and a spine that said, "Don't make me choose." The corridor smelled like bleach and roast duck, cleaning and celebration in a single breath. Lila stepped into the triangle of friction wearing a dress that made cameras love her. It made the guard hesitate, which was an ugly magic to watch work. "He's with me," she said. She didn't look at Elias yet. She looked at the policy first. "Miss Harrington," the manager said, switching to syrup. "Club regulations require—" "Respect," Lila said softly, letting the word fill the space like a fire alarm you can't shut off. "And a map. He's looking for the West Service entrance. Give him directions. Not a shakedown." The guard's jaw tightened. "We weren't." "You were," she said, not cruelly. "But here's a better ending. You point him to the right door, and we all pretend the club is the kind of place we brag to our children about." The manager flushed the color of Cabernet. "Of course." Only then did she turn to Elias. Close up, his expression was a study in composure. Humiliation folded cleanly, shame ironed flat, a little thread of fury uncut. The garment bag in his hand had a name tag clipped to the zipper, Milaye Monroe. Blue. "Wrong door," he said, as if narrating the obvious were a shield. "Right person," she replied, and only then did her eyes go soft. "Miss Harrington," Victor said from the threshold. He'd followed, not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't trust the room. He took in the scene, the uniform, the garment bag, the manager's politeness doing push-ups, and put it together faster than most men of his altitude did. "Mr. Monroe," Elias supplied, steady. "I work nights at the university. I volunteer mornings at my sister's school. Tonight I'm a courier for a dress that will make her feel like a story she's worthy of." Victor's mouth twitched. The man liked sentences that did 3 jobs at once. "Do you know my daughter, Mr. Monroe?" Lila felt the air go thin, as if someone had opened a door in winter. She answered before the room could write her version of the truth. "He helped me stop pretending," she said. "It wasn't the whole story. It was the part that would change it." Victor's eyes, trained on balance sheets and human tells, flicked between them and saw the current passing through. "I see," he said, which meant I see the river and the rocks it will need to climb. To his credit, he didn't embarrass them. He turned to the manager. "Show Mr. Monroe the west entrance. With an apology, the kind people feel." "They did," the manager murmured. The guard bowed a millimeter. Elias accepted without shrinking or preening. He glanced at Lila, gratitude like a small flare behind his calm, then vanished down a hallway that split the world into staff and story again. Victor waited until they were alone with the hum of refrigeration and soft music bleeding through the wall. Then he said, "Are you involved with him?" Lila thought of lies that sounded like protection and felt like erasure. She picked the other thing. "Yes." Victor's nod was the precise angle of a man assessing a storm he cannot forbid. "Then we discussed the weather," he said. "Not just the romance." They returned to the table like actors re-entering a scene with fresh subtext. Robert Yates had questions, of course he did. The interns had whispers. Tom the TA had a look like vindication dressed in envy. Lila answered questions with a calm she hadn't owned a month earlier. Victor did not rescue her. He tested her sail against gusts. "Who was that?" Yates asked too loudly. "A man on an errand of care," Lila said, and smiled like she'd just told a good joke. The table couldn't decide whether to laugh. Dinner arrived. Conversation moved. But the air had changed keys. Lila's fork found a rhythm that wasn't appetite. Her phone vibrated in her clutch. A photo from Mia, blue dress, shining girl. The caption, "He saved the night." Lila put the phone face down and felt the argument inside her reach a conclusion. During coffee, she excused herself. Victor watched her go and didn't stop her. He knew the look of a decision making itself. She found Elias outside on the west curb, the garment bag delivered, his jacket collar up against a wind that loved him too hard. The streetlight made his breath visible. "I keep thinking of your sentence," she said. "The club I bragged to my children about. That's not tonight." "Maybe tomorrow," he said, "with practice." "They won't practice unless someone makes them," she said, "unless someone costs them." He turned, leaning his hip on the low iron fence. "Hi, Lila." "Hi," she said. The word carried a month of lemons and truce and not pretending. "I don't want to be a secret." He closed his eyes like a man bracing for impact. "Secrets survive, people don't." "I don't want to survive us," she said. "I want to own the frame." He studied her face, the club's glow gilding her hair and the grit in her jaw. "Your father's table will not applaud this chapter." "I know. Social media will try to turn it into a parable you didn't write." "I know. People will say I'm using you," he said, not because he believed it, but because he had learned to prepare for the accusation. "You refused my money," she said. "You gave me questions. If anyone asks for the receipt, I'll show them a lemon." He huffed a laugh, surprised despite himself. "You'll show them a very confusing lemon." "Then I'll translate," she said. She reached for his hand, hesitated, took it. The contact felt like a courtroom oath. Truth promised up front. "What's your plan?" he asked, because that's what people who have had to earn everything ask before they leap. "Simple," she said. "We show up, together, where we are already going." "The university gala next week? I'm going. You're going. We do not arrive as a surprise to each other." He watched her for a long moment. "If we do this, we do it honestly," he said. "No gloss. No billionaire's daughter rescues janitor narratives. No janitor teaches billionaire to feel headlines. We're human beings who met at a table and shared a language." "We're a studio," she said, "and a truce." He squeezed her hand once and let go, the way you do when you agree to hold something heavier together and need both palms free. "Okay." She exhaled, a sound like a weight dropping from a height. "Okay." Behind them, the club doors opened. Victor stepped out, coat on, alone. He took in their distance, their choice to stand where a security camera could see and the street could overhear, and nodded small, an acknowledgement of their honesty, if not their wisdom. "Mr. Monroe," he said. "Good evening." "Sir," Elias replied. Victor looked at his daughter, the set of her shoulders, the absence of a mask. "Lila," he said, "finish your evening with your friends if you like. I'll have the car." "I'm not done here," she said, calm. He dipped his chin a fraction. "Then I'll wait." He turned and walked toward the curb, a king accepting weather's sovereignty. At the door, he paused and looked back. "Mr. Monroe," he called, and when Elias met his gaze, Victor chose a sentence as deliberate as a check he knew would clear. "Be worthy of her." "I'm trying," Elias said. "Try out loud," Victor replied. "The quiet ones don't get the benefit of the doubt." He disappeared inside. The night breathed again. "Is that permission?" Elias asked. "It's not exile," Lila said. "From him, that's a start." They walked. Not far, just around the block where the club's glow fell off and the city returned to its usual story. People moving through weather with errands and budgets and dreams nobody bothered to turn into plaques. Lila told him about Cecilia's arched brow, about Tom's look, about the sentence she'd stolen from herself at dinner that made Victor almost proud. "Buying questions," Elias said. "We should start a fund." "We already did," she said, thinking of the spiral, the studio, the receipts with their useful ink. "The return has been obscene." At the corner, a bus hissed. A woman laughed into her phone. A delivery driver cursed softly at a puddle and then laughed too, because what else can you do in a city that doesn't care whether your socks are wet? Life continued like an index of small economics. "Stop racism, family," Lila said suddenly, turning to the dark camera of the night like it could hear. Type open if you believe some doors only learn manners when we walk through them together. Type loud if you know love needs a strategy. Elias shook his head, smiling. You're going to pick a fight with a building. I'm going to pick a fight with a story, she said. Buildings are slower to learn. They circled back. At the club, Victor stood by the car with a patience he didn't perform for many people. He didn't ask for a recap. His face said he could read the minutes of this meeting in the way Lila's chin didn't tremble. You're decided, he said. I'm learning out loud, she said. He opened the door, then closed it without ushering her in. An old-school gesture of sovereignty. I'll make the calls I need to make, he said. Before next week's gala, the right people will know what story I prefer they tell. It won't stop the wrong ones, but it will make some mouths choose silence. Thank you, she said, shocked and not. Don't, he replied. I'm not endorsing this. I'm hedging against the kind of ugliness I don't allow near my daughter. He nodded at Elias. If you hurt her, you will discover new definitions of scarcity. I won't, Elias said. It wasn't a promise to the billionaire. It was a promise to the woman who had learned to breathe underwater and come back up with sentences. Victor left them on the curb with a driver who pretended to check the tires and really just wanted a front row seat to an untelevised history. Lila and Elias stood with the easy awkwardness of people who had just agreed to something brave and had not yet told their hands how to be. Tomorrow, she asked. Studio, he said. Same time. Bring a suit, she said. For the gala. He grinned, a brief, boyish flash that made the night look less expensive. I have one. Good, she said. We're going to teach a room how to watch. They parted like actors at the end of Act 2. Separate doors, same stage. The city put its head down and kept making mourning. The gossip engines did what they were built to do. By noon the next day, a grainy photo from a Heritage Club employee's cousin's friend circulated on message boards that specialize in certainty without context. Billionaire Iris defends janitor at exclusive club. The comments performed their usual calculus of envy and disdain. Some students on campus posted lemons with tiny crowns and the caption, "Own the frame." Tom, the TA, wrote a paragraph on his private story about boundaries and professionalism that read like a man auditioning to be devoured. Lila did not respond. Elias did not post. They met at midnight in a library that did not care about hashtags and turned to the next page of the spiral because regardless of what the internet thought it knew, the macro exam was on Friday, and the mind is a muscle you cannot feed with rumor. Translate until it breathes, he said, like a priest pronouncing a blessing. No pretending, she echoed, like a vow. Outside, the city rehearsed for the gala, polishing itself for a story that would not go as written. Inside, they sketched another lemon and then moved beyond it to curves that would not bend for applause. Because some tests were about markets, others were about names on doors. The most important ones were about whether you could stand in your own frame when the room tried to shrink it. The week had 7 days left in it. That was enough time to turn a small angle that would look like a miracle from a balcony. The city dressed itself in glass and gold for the university gala. Spotlights combed the clouds. Valets traced quiet arcs with their arms. The foyer smelled like peonies and ambition. A string quartet tuned up in the corner, then turned room noise into music as if by polite magic. Lila arrived in a black dress that refused to apologize. Elias arrived in a suit that did not pretend to be anything other than well cared for and honestly earned. They stepped through the doors at the same moment from different sides of the entry hall, locked eyes across the marble, and decided together to remove secrecy from the story. They closed the distance slowly so that the room had time to witness without believing it was owed a scandal. People notice. They always do. They notice the angle of a spine, the way two hands meet. They notice who looks away first. Whispers built their tiny ladders against the walls. Lila heard a few of them climb. Is that him? She brought the janitor. Look at the confidence on him. Look at the nerve on her. They kept walking. They kept breathing. They kept the promise they had made on the curb outside the club. Try out loud. Dean Park met them at the check-in table. Her eyes took in everything the way a careful reader takes in the first paragraph of a book. She smiled, real and warm, and extended a hand to Elias first. Mr. Monroe, welcome, Ms. Harrington. You have caused a pleasant storm in my inbox this week. Before either of you worry, I like this kind of weather. Lila laughed. The tight band in her chest loosened one notch. Inside the ballroom, donors occupied the front tables like islands of influence. Faculty clustered near the stage, each with a different relationship to gowns and tuxedos. Students drifted at the edges, mouths open at the dessert table, like they had just seen proof that sugar could be architecture. Victor Harrington arrived with two board members in his wake, saw Lila and Elias together, and lowered his shoulders by an inch. Not surrender. Readiness. He shook Elias's hand with a businessman's precision and a father's scrutiny, then turned to Lila. You understand the eyes in this room, I do. Then take agency over them. We intend to. He did not smile, yet something in his face conceded respect. The program began with the ritual gratitude of galas. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for honoring the life of the mind. Thank you for the gift of buildings that outlive us and scholarships that outlove us. The president spoke about access and excellence. The quartet played a movement that sounded like rain remembering the street. Plates arrived and departed with silent choreography. The whisper landed just before dessert. It started at a table near the back where Rumor likes to sit. A staffer from the Heritage Club had a cousin whose roommate was in the catering crew tonight. The story condensed quickly into a poisonous capsule. The janitor is using her. He is angling for a position. He will end up with a scholarship that her father bought. Lila did not hear the first version. She heard the echo 2 tables later, then the snide little laugh that so often comes with unexamined certainty. She felt heat rise that was not shame and not fear. It was a clean anger, the kind that builds bridges instead of fires. Dean Park stepped to the microphone just as the whisper was about to grow another set of legs. She cleared her throat and waited for the hush that rooms give to voices that have earned authority. Before we announce the usual awards, I want to announce a new one. It is our first scholarship for adult learners who left school for family duty or financial crisis, and who have since demonstrated uncommon initiative and clarity of purpose. It will not be donor-directed, it will not be a favor, it will be blind review by a panel of faculty who read without knowing names. The scholarship will fund full completion costs, including books, and the kind of support that makes studying possible for people who work. We named it for 2 words that have been guiding our reforms this year: question and courage. She paused as the words lit in the air. Question and courage. No surnames, no plaques that sounded like a single family name, a frame with room for many stories. The first recipient is a former full scholarship student who left to care for a terminally ill parent, who returned to campus in the quietest hours to keep learning in the presence of books, who wrote an essay that took my breath in the way only truth can do when it stops apologizing for itself. The award committee did not know his name when they chose him. Tonight we all will. She looked up. Her eyes found Elias. Silence broke into a ripple and then into a wave. Mr. Elias Monroe, please join me on stage for a heartbeat. Elias did not move. Then Lila touched his arm and the contact turned uncertainty into motion. He stood. He walked the long aisle like a man walking an unpaved road he had already measured with his feet in the dark. People clapped. Some stood, some did not. Victor rose, then the board members beside him rose, because men like that do not sit when a room is learning what dignity looks like. Elias reached the stage. Dean Park shook his hand, and then, in a gesture that told 1,000 tiny stories, stepped back so he could stand at the microphone without being shadowed. I am better at brooms than microphones. Laughter relieved the room of its stiffness, but I know a few things as well as I know how to make a floor shine. He told the story briefly and without self-pity. A mother's diagnosis, a scholarship clock that did not stop. 2 younger siblings who did not ask to be brave, but were. He told the room about reading on night shifts because knowledge feeds a different hunger. He told them about a student who arrived at midnight carrying a cheap spiral notebook and a willingness to be honest. I taught her how to ask questions that earn answers. She taught me how to try out loud. He looked at Lila then, not in a way that turned the speech into a romance, but in a way that turned the room into a studio that included them both. He looked back at the crowd. If I accept this award, I accept the responsibility it represents. To complete what I began, to champion the mind as a renewable resource, to keep doors open behind me, He finished with a sentence that landed like a bell. Thank you for seeing without needing someone else to tell you what you were looking at. Applause rose, tidal and sincere. Even the skeptics clapped because something in them wanted to belong to a better story than the one they came ready to tell. Victor was the first at the edge of the stage. He extended his hand and did not withdraw it until the grip meant more than courtesy. Cecilia Park stepped forward next. You will call me next week, she said without drama. I am building a fellowship that needs your way of explaining the world. Robert Yates cleared his throat, then surprised himself by saying, Well done, son. Tom, the teaching assistant, stood at the back by the exit and swallowed whatever sentence he had prepared about boundaries. He looked at his shoes and then at the lemon pinned in a button on a student's lapel. A little homemade signal that meant own the frame. He did not clap. He did not leave. He absorbed. Dessert arrived. Nobody tasted it. The award had turned sugar into background music. Students approached Elias in quiet lines and asked nervous questions that had nothing to do with scholarships and everything to do with permission. How do you keep going when nobody is grading you? How do I admit I am lost? He answered as if he had time for all of them. Because he did. Because he remembered perfectly every time he had needed someone to answer like that for him. A man in a charcoal suit introduced himself as director of the tutoring center. We have a position that wants you, he said. Part-time now, full-time when you finish. We do not pay in applause. We pay in checks and in the outcomes of students who will write your name on the inside cover of their notebooks. Lila stood a step to the side and watched the room process a recalibration. She did not need to be the center of the scene. She had been the student in the story. Tonight belonged to the teacher. She felt a hand at her elbow and turned. Victor looked different. Not softer, truer. I did not arrange that scholarship, he said before she could ask. I told Evelyn Park that if she built one, I would match anything anonymous donors gave. But I told her it had to be blind and it had to be earned. Then he did smile, small and rare. He earned it. Lila blinked fast and nodded because tears would smear the winged eyeliner she had learned to draw by studying YouTube at 2 in the morning during a very different chapter of her life. The program ended. The quartet packed their cases. Tables dissolved into clusters of new alliances. Outside, the night felt like a fresh page. On the steps, Lila and Elias found a square of quiet. They will say I got this because of you, he said. Some will. And some will say you chose me because I represented a rebellion rather than a person. They paused together inside the complication. Then give them better sentences to repeat, Lila said. I will start. You earned this because you kept learning when no one graded you. You earned this because your essay made an academic cry. You earned this because you turned fog into air for a girl who thought her brain was a room she was not allowed to enter. He laughed softly. The laugh sounded like a window opened in a house that had held its breath for years. Come see something, he said. He led her around the side of the building to a narrow courtyard where service lights hummed. Mia waited there, blue dress shimmering like a night sky caught in a small storm. She threw her arms around her brother, then around Lila, then around both of them at once with the wild generosity of 17. I saw you on stage. I filmed it badly. I screamed, Mother would have screamed too, and then told you to eat before you faint. She planted a kiss on her brother's cheek and then whispered to Lila like a conspirator. Please do not let him pretend he does not need help sometimes. He gives all of it away. I will make him practice receiving, Lila said, smiling. They stood together for a minute that felt longer than a minute. The courtyard held family and city, and the good ache of the day finally landing in muscles that had worked. Back at the curb, Victor waited by his car again, a figure cut from the same steel as the skyline, and yet more human tonight than the skyline ever manages to be. I will extend a formal offer next week, he said to Elias. Not into the company proper yet, into the foundation wing that funds programs like the one you just benefited from. Build me outcomes I can defend to the hardest rooms. Then we talk about the rest. Elias nodded. Thank you for the clarity, Victor nodded back. Be worthy of her, and let her be worthy of you. That is the trade that pays forever. The cars thinned. The night relaxed its shoulders. Lila looked up at the library windows glowing across the quad and felt the tug of a different kind of celebration. Studio, studio, he echoed. They walked back through the empty campus in formal clothes that had become comfortable because they had done honest work in them. In the third-floor reading room, the air smelled like paper and possibility. Lila set the cheap spiral between them and wrote in a new corner of a new page, question and courage. She drew a small lemon beside it, then a small truce. She wrote a sentence she wanted to remember when days turned back into ordinary time. We did not game the room. We changed the room by telling it the truth. She looked up. Elias had opened the quantum physics text again and smiled because the night had returned him to the kind of quiet that keeps a person company. Stop racism, family, Lila said softly to the invisible audience that had kept her brave. Drop the city you are watching from. Type courage if you have ever needed to walk into a room that thought it already knew you and ask it to meet you again. Type question if you are ready to trade old answers for better ones. Elias closed the book and met her eyes. We still have a final to crush, he said. We do, she said. But first, say it out loud so the room hears it too. He knew what she meant. He set his palm on the spiral as if swearing in. I love you, she answered. No fireworks, no orchestra swell. Just two people in a room full of books speaking the sentence they had earned through 100 smaller ones. The clock ticked forward. Pens moved. The city slept. The chapter did not end so much as open into what comes next. Next is where promises go to prove they were worthy of being made. Next is where work becomes legacy. Next is chapter 5, where the final exam is not the one on paper and where the cost of truth meets the return of love. Say Tiep Tuk, and we will finish the story with a finale that honors every lesson the studio taught them. Morning arrived with the clean light of a new contract. Campus lawns were still jeweled with sprinklers when Lila crossed toward the business building for her last exam. She carried two things that mattered more than pencils: a cheap spiral with dog-eared tabs and a way of thinking that didn't run from fog. The hallway buzzed with the familiar ritual of pre-test bravado. Tom, the TA, stood at the front like a bouncer of knowledge, collecting blue books in confidence. You look ready, he said, surprise tucked behind neutrality. I am prepared to understand, Leela answered, and took her seat near the aisle where oxygen felt easier. The exam was long and fair in the way good mountains are fair. The first essay asked for a policy memo comparing unconditional cash transfers to targeted subsidies in a city where groceries spiked, but wages didn't. 6 months ago, she would have stacked definitions until they toppled. Now she wrote humans into the lines before she put lines on a graph. She drew one neat set of axes, found the truce, narrated the costs that liked to hide under applause, and moved on. By the last problem, she felt the calm of a runner who recognizes the last mile's shape. She turned in her blue book, nodded once at Tom, and walked out. On the quad, she typed a message that had become a small tradition. Stop racism, family, the final is done. If you have ever walked out of a room that used to terrify you and felt the ground say welcome, type home. Elias waited on the library steps with 2 paper cups that smelled like courage. He didn't ask how it went. He could read the answer in the way her shoulders sat level. Now comes the real test, he said. Which one? The one where the room tests whether it learned anything last night, he said, meaning the gala's ripple. The one where my scholarship lives one day longer than a headline and proves it can work in ordinary time. They kept ordinary time deliberately. For 3 days, there were no stages, no speeches, only studio. They reviewed statistics without panic. They read aloud from an econ paper so dense the footnotes could have been their own cuisine, pausing to translate every sentence into something a bus driver could argue with. They wrote a thank you note to Dean Park that used no flattery and much gratitude. Lila helped Mia sketch first draft plans for pre-med classes that would not eat the girl alive. The storm still came. It always does. A gossip account posted a photo of Lila and Elias under the caption, fairy tale or fishing. The comments rehearsed their old calculus. She's collecting a cause. He's collecting a ladder. Victor texted a link with only 2 words. Ignore it. They did. The exam portal uploaded grades on a Sunday. Lila stared at her laptop until the cursor felt like it was breathing. She clicked. Econ 101, Final 94. Course Grade A. She did not scream. She closed her eyes and allowed a single tear to move like a quiet guest at a dignified party. When she opened them, she saw an email from a different direction altogether. From the Harrington Foundation. Subject proposal. Body. We invite a pilot for a city-facing teaching lab to test low-cost, high-honesty learning methods for first-year students and working adults. Director candidate Elias Monroe. Curriculum architect candidate Lila Harrington. Budget attached. Deliverables brutal and measurable. Reply with your worst concerns and your best plan. She carried the laptop to the library like a chalice. Elias read the email twice, once with his eyes and once with his breath. Your father is a strategist, he said. He is offering a field and demanding touchdowns. We do better than touchdowns, Lila said. We build the field for whoever comes next. Before they could answer, they had to qualify. The foundation insisted on a month of listening instead of designing. Lila and Elias visited community colleges at breakfast and night school classrooms at 9. They watched a single mom open a textbook with one hand while spooning oatmeal into a toddler with the other. They sat in a warehouse break room where two men argued about whether promotions were a myth or a math problem. They filled the cheap spiral with sentences that refused to be smoothed. Back on campus, they met with professors who had been teaching since the library's carpet was new. Some welcomed them with the relief of people who had been waiting to confess that the current system graded compliance too well and comprehension too rarely. Others crossed their arms and asked for randomized controlled trials and error bars that could survive in peer review. Elias said yes to both kinds of rooms. We will measure what breathes, he said. We will not baptize hunches as truth. We will also not let dashboards bully reality. They designed 3 pilots. One was a midnight studio section for Econ 101, where grading rubrics required human translation before math. One embedded a questions-first workshop into the orientation week to teach students how to get lost productively. One sent story-trained tutors into 2 neighborhood centers to translate algebra into bus routes and grocery aisles. They kept the budget rude: paper, pencils, time, food, a small stipend for students who would have to trade hours with a shift manager to attend. Nothing glossy, nothing that looked good in photos while failing in rooms. Victor pushed back where he should. Why midnight? Because shame sleeps badly at noon, Elias said. Some learning needs the dark's permission first. Why story before math? Because story is the handle. Students can lift the math when the handle exists. Why you? Because I have failed and learned, and I am not embarrassed to say both out loud, Elias said. Because I can teach a model to ask its own questions. Victor nodded. Build me outcomes I can defend to a room that thinks outcomes are the only thing that matter. The pilots opened on a Monday without ceremony. 16 students sat at 3 big tables with markers and coffee in a windowless room that had survived many better and worse plans. Lila introduced the rule at the top of the whiteboard in thick letters. No pretending. Several students laughed, startled. One young man with forearms like ropes said, "Finally." They began with a bus schedule because everyone in the room had waited for a late bus. They turned it into supply and demand, then into opportunity cost, then into the calculus of how much a city values the time of people who can't afford to own the road. They solved for slope only after they solved for dignity. They took attendance by asking, what is the most expensive minute of your day and why? The answers wrote the curriculum for the next 2 weeks. By Friday, attendance had grown by accident. Word of mouth is faster than any mailing list when hope is real. The dean asked for a check-in. The tutoring center asked for a playbook. A professor who had rolled his eyes on Tuesday sat in the back on Thursday and left without speaking, eyes wet for reasons he would not discuss until winter. There were stumbles. One night, a student named Priya cried over a graph that wouldn't stop looking like a fence. Elias slid a blank page in front of her and said, "Draw me the fence you are afraid of." She drew a gate. They labeled the hinges together until the graph could be walked through. Another night, a veteran named Jorge stormed out when the group turned a pricing problem into a fairness debate. He came back the next week with an apology and a story about supply lines that turned the room into church. Metrics followed, not vanity ones. Attendance, exam deltas, drop rates that slowed, emails from students who had almost quit and did not. Victor read them at his desk late at night and forwarded exactly none to his peers because some proofs work better whispered to the right next person. Meanwhile, the internet did the thing it does. A clip from the gala surfaced on a larger platform with an unlovely caption. A talk radio segment asked whether universities had gone soft, using Lila as Exhibit A and Elias as Exhibit B. Dean Park forwarded the links with only 3 words. Stay on mission, they did. On a rain-heavy Thursday, the pilot room lost power and kept learning by flashlight until facilities fixed the breaker. On a Monday, a student brought cupcakes for the math midterm because she had decided exams did not own her stomach. On a Wednesday, Mia visited in her blue dress and volunteered to tutor freshmen in biology with the same question's first rule. On a quiet Friday, Tom the TA walked in at the end, hovered by the door, and waited until everyone left to speak. Your methods make underprepared students dependent on you, he began, in the tone of someone trying to sound collegial while reading from an essay they wrote in their head. They make underprepared systems depend on students, Lila replied. Then she softened. You are welcome to sit next week. Ask questions like a student. Answer none. We will all be better for it. He came. He took notes. He asked one stunned question that changed how he taught section. He did not admit it publicly and did not need to. The semester ended with grades that were not miracles but were maps. Students gained 10, 12, sometimes 20 points over their first exams. One failed anyway, and Elias called him the next day to schedule coffee because sometimes the best evidence that a method works is what it does after numbers say it didn't. On the day results posted, Victor asked Lila and Elias to come to the Foundation's conference room. The table looked like all tables in rooms where money and willpower meet. He set a single-page document in front of them. The Harrington Studio for Learning and Work, a permanent program with 3 pillars, the Midnight Studio on campus, the Questions First workshop baked into orientation, and a city partnership that pays students for peer teaching in neighborhoods where potential is vandalized by logistics. Director Elias Monroe, co-director Lila Harrington. Budget real, accountability uncompromising. I won't run this like a vanity wing, Victor said. If outcomes fade, funding does. If you scale too fast, I will cut you back to the size that learns. If you keep making rooms breathe, I will go to war for your budget and I will win. They signed. The pen did not feel like a wand. It felt like a tool that could build a staircase if they kept showing up. The launch day came with less glitter than a gala and more gravity. A small ribbon cut by 3 students who had written the program as much as any adult. Dean Park spoke for 90 seconds and then let the room get to work. The tutoring center director moved his office closer to the studio so he could hear how the air changed. A janitor from another building stopped at the door and smiled at the sight of equations sharing space with bus maps and grocery lists. That night, when the last student left and the whiteboards looked like a city of ideas seen from the air, Lila stood in the empty room with Elias and listened to the quiet that comes after right work. We could get married here, she said, half joking, half prophecy. Not allowed, he said, grinning. The catering would stain the carpet. Then somewhere nearby, she said. Where else but home? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box that looked shy. He opened it. The ring was simple and certain. He did not kneel. He stood level with her, because that was the point. You taught me that love is not a strategy, but it needs one, he said. You taught me to try out loud. You taught me to own the frame. Will you keep building this studio with me until the rooms we love no longer need us every night? Yes, she said without ceremony, because the ceremony had been the year. They told no one for an hour. They sat at the table where Lemons had taught a new language and wrote a list titled, Promises We Will Keep When It Gets Loud. It included sleep. It included listening. It included the right to say, I do not know yet in rooms that demand a quick answer. When they finally told Victor, he nodded as if a forecast he'd quietly hoped for had arrived on time. He shook Elias's hand for longer than custom required. He hugged his daughter like a man who had learned that control makes a poor substitute for love, and that respect pays dividends, love never cashes, but always feels. He offered to pay for a wedding. They asked for scholarships instead. He said both. Months turned into their own proof. The studio became not a story about a billionaire's daughter and a janitor, but about a replicable way of making minds feel welcome in rooms where they had been treated like trespassers. The Foundation published an open playbook, so copycats did not have to start from shadows, other schools called. Some copied badly, then better. A city agency asked for help translating bus budgets into policy that wouldn't apologize only after it failed. An employer consortium asked to sponsor midnight studio sessions for entry-level workers who had been hired for potential and starved of mentorship. On a Friday in late spring, Dean Park stopped by at 12:45 a.m., leaned against the doorframe, and watched a room of humans volunteer to be intelligent together. She wiped her eyes in spite of herself and said, quietly to no one in particular, "This is what a university looks like when it remembers its job." After everyone left, Lila set the spiral on the table and turned to the very first page. Different beats harder, no pretending. Translate until it breathes. Practice is a kindness. Own the frame. Question and courage. She added one more line in small print under all the others. Love learns. Elias closed the quantum book and met her gaze. The room held their past like a museum and their future like a workshop. Stop racism, family, Lila whispered toward the lens of the dark window that had become a friend. If you've ever felt written by a story you didn't choose, type frame. If you found a teacher who handed you the right question at the right moment, tag them in your heart tonight. If you have the privilege to hold a door, hold it longer than is comfortable. That's how rooms change. Outside, campus lamps hummed. Somewhere across town, a bus arrived on time because someone decided it should. In a house with a blue dress hanging on the closet door, Mia fell asleep on a biology chapter and dreamed of round after round of small mercies that looked like exams and were actually building blocks. Inside the studio, two people who had stopped pretending kept their promise to keep learning out loud. The final they had feared turned into the first of many not-on-paper tests they would pass together, and every time a student stopped renting answers and bought a better question, the room applauded without clapping. The story did not end. It kept graduating.